Right, hey guys, how we doing? So I'm finally checking this video out. You guys have been asking me for a while now. Because I really did enjoy Mother's Basement's other Sword Art Online analyzation videos and discussions and breakdown stuff and what's in a scene, whatever videos ages ago. And then obviously Alicization is been out. And this was called Dumpster Fire Simulator 2019. I've literally just finished Sword Art Online Alicization, and it's an interesting series. It's still ongoing. I think I finished it just in time for it to be continuing in like a week or so, maybe a couple of weeks. I won't give my opinions yet. I might express them throughout this video, because I don't know how. I'm guessing Mother's Basement didn't really enjoy it, considering the title. So let's see what he has to say. I might express how I feel. I might share the same opinion, and then afterwards, if there's things that I feel haven't been mentioned, I'll go into that way. I won't be too long though, because this is like a 55-minute long video, so let's, I don't want this to be any longer than an hour, so let's do this, shall we?
The horse is alive. Long beat the horse.
Nice.
So there's a new season of Sword Art Online that just finished airing at the end of winter. Well, technically it's still ongoing, but has stopped for a hiatus.
24 episodes was a lot.
Episodes in, which I thought was what 2 seasons was. But
yeah, it's usually 12 or 13 episodes, isn't it?
About that, so whatever. The point is, there's now a whole bunch more SAO than there was before, and as part of the contract I signed with Anime Satan for YouTube fame, I'm obligated to watch it and talk about it. And as the burning sensation in my soul keeps telling me, kill, kill, never stop, also I'm a bit late on that, considering it started in September.
Yeah.
But I wanted to take the time to do this right and tear into the new series as a whole.
Okay.
At least as a half, now that the first major arc has run its course.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it continues, but okay.
Very quickly, I have 2 important things to say.
Okay.
Firstly, I'm gonna stop dunking on Reki Kawahara so personally.
Okay, that's fair, yeah.
He's expressed sincere ambition to improve his
He
own
wants
writing.
to further better
himself.
himself.
Be a nice guy, and even if that wasn't true, some of the shit that I've said about him is just uncalled for. So, Reki, if you're watching this, I am sorry, and I will try to stick to pure criticism.
Oh, that's
Secondly,
nice.
I owe an apology to his fans, too, because I've done them dirty in my past reviews of the series. I don't like the attitude that enjoying bad anime or not liking good ones invalidates or degrades your opinion. I told myself at the time that I was satirizing.
I enjoyed Sword Art Online, but I can see the flaws.
SAO's fan base to an absolutely absurd degree in my videos, but really, I think I was coming up with an excuse to be an asshole for cheap laughs and not feel bad about it.
Right.
What makes the anime community great is how welcoming it can be to the freaks and geeks of the world, and it can't be that if we're drawing arbitrary lines in the sand on who deserves to be here.
Right.
The only people who don't are those who are trying to push others out, and I don't want to be one of those people. No. So SAO fans, I am really sorry. If
thank you, Jeff.
Tuned in, take this video for what it is.
I did find it difficult watching some of your videos, but I was taking it in.
Presented in a manner that I really hope entertains and informs people who aren't me. On that note, to my fans, I'm sorry to bring you down with all this serious talk, but I felt it needed to be said. I will now commence with the complaining and the making of the funny about the cartoon that we all hate. Well, that's not entirely accurate. There are some things about Alicization that I do actually like.
There were enjoyable moments, but it is weird.
I still think that it is a very flawed show, and this season contains some of its absolute worst moments, but it makes an effort to fix some of the show's ongoing problems as well, and it's generally more fun than previous seasons, even if it is still incredibly dumb.
The voice acting's class.
This season still
I love
the
shouty, angry bits.
Alicization represents a break from the series' signature hook. For once, Kirito isn't embroiled in some sinister conspiracy behind a commercially available MMORPG.
Yes, he's just
Instead,
literally
after
just
losing the lamest street fight ever to the last member of Death Gun and winding up in a coma, he finds himself on life support in the Underworld, a fully simulated fantasy land designed as a testing ground for artificial intelligence. This world is based on SAO's cardinal system, and thus has some video gamey elements at play, such as SAO's sword skill system, but it's meant to be viewed more as a place with real history and culture rather than just a gamer's playground. Ironically, in breaking this convention, Alicization has turned SAO into a much more conventional isekai story, where the protagonist finds himself trapped in a totally foreign fantasy land.
Yeah.
Well, okay, technically he's been there before, as he was hired by the company running the Alicization project, RAP, to help with the test by diving into the underworld and living as a child there for a few years, but his memories of those events were erased, so it's all new to him. relatively speaking at least. Now, the reason he had to help out with that test is...
Because he's Kirito.
See, Rath's research is focused on the Fluctlight, a quantum field in the human brain that serves as the basis for our consciousness.
Here we go.
Basically, in SAO's world, the soul is a scientifically quantifiable thing. Using a full-dive VR device that can read the Fluctlight, called a soul translator, Rath has created a stock of cloned artificial Fluctlights to serve as the basis for a self-aware AI that can pilot unmanned military hardware. But SAO, you say? What about the little girl who single-handedly destroyed your entire sense of dramatic tension, Yui? Isn't she an AI? Why do you need ridiculous pseudoscience to justify a thing that already exists in your world and that all of your viewers have already accepted? Well, you see, you simpleton, you absolute fool, Yui is a top-down AI. That is a simulated intelligence built within a binary computer system that draws from pre-programmed information to respond to predetermined stimuli.
Of course.
Rath wants to make a bottom-up AI, consciousness operating on hardware emulating the human mind that is capable of dynamic learning and abstract thought, and thus able to come up with its own unpredictable responses to any situation.
Think like a person.
Okay, SAO, but why couldn't a regular computer do that? Haven't you established multiple times that Yui is self-aware and capable of both learning new things and experiencing abstract emotions like love? And even if there is a meaningful distinction between the two types of AI that you're just not well written enough to convey, wouldn't Yui's established level of intelligence be perfectly serviceable for a machine that just needs to go to places and shoot things?
Yeah.
You know, one thing I... Excuse me for 1 second. Oh, gosh.
Anyway, because of like 10 more minutes of exposition that we really don't have time for, this AI has to be raised in a simulated fantasy land, and in the entire accelerated 300-year history of that world, not once has any AI committed murder or broken any other laws. Which is why Rath needs Kirito, a real human being whose experience in SAO means that he doesn't get simulation sick, to push the artificial Fluctlights around him to violate the taboo index that governs their world. In other words, Rath has seemingly solved, completely by accident, the single greatest hypothetical problem facing AI researchers today: building true intelligence that can't go against our wishes and go all Skynet on our asses. And they want to undo it. For no actual practical reason, I might add, since it's shown repeatedly that the artificial Fluctlights can, in fact, kill people so long as it's within the parameters of the taboo index to do so. Which is, you'd think, exactly how you'd want a robot soldier to work. It listens to your orders and only kills the people you tell it to. So, yeah, this whole premise is incredibly dumb and riddled with obvious holes, but to be fair, it is largely just a convoluted excuse for Reki Kawahara to do the whole Tolkien-esque sword and sorcery fantasy quest bit, building to a prophesized epic clash between the armies of good and evil for the fate of the world. That clash is framed as a load test, and the fantasy world has a lot of computery elements, but fundamentally this is generic pulp fantasy fiction, and on a basic level, it's executed pretty competently. The season's cold open drops us right into Kirito's simulated childhood in the Underworld. There we see him alongside an AI kid named Yujio working to chop down a massive rock-hard tree called the Giga Cedar that is sapping life from the countryside around it. This is their calling, a purpose handed down to them from the heavens that every citizen in the Underworld is bound to carry out until they complete it or die. But even with that tedious job, they find a bit of time to goof off, as kids are wont to do. Together with their friend Alice, they embark on a small journey to gather ice from a magical cave nearby, which they want to use to keep their sandwiches cool. They accidentally leave the cave through the wrong exit, ending up in the Dark Territory, a land of evil creatures that humans are forbidden to enter by the taboo index. Overhead, they see two knights fighting on dragons, one of whom is slain and falls to the ground. Moving to help, Alice trips like an idiot and her finger touches the other side, making her the first human in the Underworld to ever violate the taboo index. The next day, the same dragon rider descends to their village, declaring himself to be an integrity knight who is there to take Alice away for interrogation and execution. Kirito tries to stop him, but Yujio can't bring himself to help, and ultimately Alice is carted off, and Kirito wakes up, crying for reasons that he can no longer remember. It's honestly a pretty damn effective opening scene that raises interesting questions by introducing us to a character we know and know in an unfamiliar context. It then gives us just enough time to get comfortable with this strange new status quo and attached to Kirito's new companions before turning everything on its head and pulling us back to reality. I genuinely enjoyed this.
It was quite a good opening.
But that enjoyment diminished with every second Kirito spent outside the underworld, trading tedious exposition over drinks and snacks with the same-faced, personality-devoid mannequins that form the show's supporting cast. After 20 straight minutes of that, I was honestly hoping that Johnny Black's poison needle would somehow kill me too.
Oh,
no such luck, but thankfully after that inciting incident, the real world takes a backseat to Kirito's adventures in the underworld, which are a heck of a lot more interesting, relatively speaking. Alicization is surprisingly one of the few modern isekai anime I've seen that properly takes advantage of the two worlds dynamic. We have a much clearer picture than we usually do of the world our hero left, and he's gotten actual motivation to try to get back instead of just eternally indulging in escapist shenanigans.
Yeah.
Which gives him, a reason to actively do stuff instead of just letting the story happen to him.
Just let the plot.
We also have a more conventional secondary protagonist in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yu-Gi-Oh's
Kirito's
interesting.
forgotten AI childhood friend who learns the way of the sword from Kirito when he comes back, uses it to complete his calling in record time, and follows him to the Sword Mastery Academy as part of his personal quest to rescue Alice.
Yes, they must save
Yu-Gi-Oh!
her.
Is a naive, earnest young man, unremarkable by the standards of fantasy heroes, but in the context of SAO, he has more personality than the entire existing cast.
He does have a
in
lot.
a few rare
He's
moments,
interesting
Yu-Gi-Oh!
on screen.
Even
I liked him.
manages to draw a bit of blood from Kirito's blank slate.
He had
Next to
more
him,
going
the
on
Black Swordsman
personality-wise
comes
than
off
any of
as
the other
something of an
characters in Sword Art
asocial
Online.
dork, shirking his obligations and geeking out over sword fighting.
We actually get character
It's
growth
not
with
much,
him.
and it more or less evaporates once they finally get to rescuing Alice, but it's probably the most personality he's ever shown, and it's endearing while it lasts. The rest of the cast of the Academy arc is pretty much what you'd expect from SAO.
They're just there.
Bland, forgettable non-entities that barely stray from their cookie-cutter archetypes on the rare occasions that they're well-defined enough to fit those archetypes to begin with. The bulk of the plot here revolves around a pair of rich bullies who are basically Snidely Whiplash and Dick Dastardly in Cobra Kai uniforms. These nobles spend an inordinate amount of time ineffectually taunting Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh!, goading them into fights only to get their asses kicked, and doing incredibly petty shit like cutting up Kirito's flowers, which causes him to cry. But the flowers are a metaphor, you see, for how Kirito is also trying to bloom in the foreign soil of the underworld, which makes this scene very serious and emotional, and definitely not hilarious. This generic high school bully storyline is really just window dressing for the arc's true purpose, to introduce us to one of Alicization's unique gameplay gimmicks, Incarnation, which allows people with strong wills to alter the properties of the world around them with their imagination. This, by the way, is apparently designed to explain that really stupid thing where Kirito came back to life. And
right. Okay.
God, I hate this show. In the context of sword fighting, Incarnation allows Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh! To enhance the strength of their blades by concentrating on what drives them to fight and channeling that emotional energy into their swords.
And it'll work.
In other words, they get stronger by literally imbuing their blades with the power of love and friendship. That is some pure grade A Saturday morning cartoon cheese, and I kinda love it, but I also think that this art's focus on it really highlights the contradiction at the heart of Sword Art Online. It's very important when evaluating a work of art to try to meet it on its own terms, but one of the big problems with SAO is that it's never been entirely clear what those terms are. It's written mostly as a simple, emotionally heightened adventure story for young audiences, its characters archetypal and its morality largely black and white, which is perfectly fine. Not every story needs to be a challenging and nuanced take on the human condition. There's value in entertainment that plays to our more basic emotional responses and meets general audiences on their level with accessible ideas. Done well, such works can be just as compelling as deeper fare that demands more intellectual engagement. And, of course, done poorly, that deeper fare can suck. Where SAO constantly runs into trouble is that it doesn't seem to know that it's a glorified Saturday morning cartoon, and thus it tries to paint itself as a serious story for serious adults, where serious things happen that seriously matter and merit serious thought.
It comes out of nowhere, and it's like
seriously not good at it. The most obvious and pervasive example of this problem lies in how the series handles the topic of sexual assault. That is to say, with zero nuance or respect, and way too often. Content warning here for anyone who wants to skip over the discussion of this season's gross, unnecessary rape scene, not to be confused with the other two. For those of you who are curious but understandably don't want to watch it, a brief rundown. Concerned that Humbert is sexually harassing his valet, that's his sword-fighting apprentice Frenica, Tease and Ronnie, Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh's valets, go to confront the rich bullies. After they don't return, Yu-Gi-Oh goes to investigate, only to find Tease and Ronnie tied up, with Humbert and Rios preparing to sexually assault them as part of their noble right of judgment.
It's weird, though, because the way they
compliance with the taboo
go around the
index
taboos,
forces
yeah.
him and us to sit there and watch as this happens until
It's
his
like it's
outrage
allowed.
at the situation pushes him over the edge. He breaks his programming, attacks the rapist with his sword in a bloody and brutal manner, and then Kirito steps in to save him, killing Rios in the process. To give Alicization the faintest sliver of credit, the use of sexual assault here does actually serve a bit of a narrative purpose, at least compared to how it was handled in Alfheim and Guntail.
Yeah, it came out of nowhere on those. This one was weird,
Yu-Gi-Oh!
but
To break
like...
programming so ingrained in his mind that he'd sacrifice his own life to uphold it.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that he'd need to witness some extreme moral transgression, probably against somebody who he cares about, in order to prompt that reaction. In the context of this season's basic bitch thematic exploration
it's
of
unnecessary.
relativism, the question of would you kill another person to stop a rape is admittedly relevant. I mean, this scene still turns the trauma of two barely developed women into fuel for the character development of a man, which is exploitative, lazy writing, but compared to SAO's other two rape scenes, which were basically just shocking kick-the-dog moments
they really
that came
were.
out of nowhere, solely for the purpose of making us hate each arc's villains, it's something. But, like most somethings in SAO, the more you think about it, the less sense it really makes. To be blunt, it's absolutely baffling that rape isn't outlawed by the taboo index.
Yeah, like, so... I couldn't get that. I was like, how is this a roundabout thing that they've
disarming
doing?
threats against it, and to minimize the causes of human suffering so that citizens have no reason to think for themselves and therefore no reason to question the church. This implies that the Pontifex thinks that sexual assault isn't a significant cause of human suffering.
Okay.
Which, yeah... Yikes. Yes, Quinella is the villain and an established sociopath, so she's going to make morally abhorrent choices that don't necessarily represent the values of the writer.
Yeah.
But she should at least exhibit consistent bad decision-making. The index forbids theft, vandalism, murder, and even kissing someone you're not married to on the lips, yet it completely ignores all sexual violence. What sense does that make?
No,
Her
it doesn't.
specific goal was to prevent this exact scenario. How did she not see this coming?
Yeah.
I don't want to cast aspersions on Reki Kawahara here because he's publicly stated that he doesn't like writing scenes like this anymore, and even apologized to Ronnie and Tease's voice actresses on Twitter when this episode aired.
Oh, really?
It was very cool of him. But the way that the show's world building bends over backwards to accommodate this happening suggests that
very
this scene
strange.
isn't here because it's thematically relevant or the story demands it. It's here either because a younger Reki just really wanted to write about rape, again, or he was just too lazy to carry through on his world building or think of anything else. Either way, not a great reason to triple dip on this particular trope, and maybe you shouldn't have had Snidely Whiplash and Dick Dastardly do it. And as if the scene wasn't tone-deaf enough in its writing, there's also some animation at play here that's exaggerated to the point that it's almost comedic. Especially the opening shot of the sequence where Rios, in a single motion, spins around, disrobes, and
jumps onto the
bed like a goddamn Looney Tune. Pardon my language, YouTube monetization bots, but what chucklefuck thought it was a good idea to include a sight gag like this in what's supposed to be a serious, upsetting, and horrific
It really changes the
Not only is this
tone
an
of
absurdly,
scene.
obviously contradictory directing choice that fundamentally undermines what the scene is going for, it shows a complete lack of respect for the gravity of the situation and the subject matter being presented, which is, again, the real heart of this show's problem. SAO wants to be an adult show with adult themes, but it invariably handles those themes with the same degree of care and emotional sophistication that G.I. Joe applies to international terrorism.
Yeah, okay.
And maybe that dissonance doesn't bother you. Maybe you even enjoy it. More power to you if you do. But boy, does it ever grate on me, and boy, am I glad that SAO will be abandoning this trope in the future.
You hope.
As a result of murdering the bullies, Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh find themselves in violation of the Taboo Index, and as happened to Alice all those years ago, an Integrity Knight is sent to the school to collect them. That Integrity Knight is none other than Alice herself, now fully grown and brainwashed
And
to fight
she's
unquestionably for the Axiom Church. As it turns out, all of the Integrity Knights were once regular people who had their memories erased and are now convinced
which is
that they
kind
were
of cool.
summoned from heaven by the Church to defend humanity from the Dark Territory. Alice carts the two criminals off to the Central Cathedral, a massive white tower at the center of the capital that really ought to have literally any other structure than a bell-shaped dome on top of it. This massive fortress is the seat of power for the season's main villain, Pontifex Administrator, and once Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh arrive there and escape their bonds, the real story begins. And the real problems start piling up.
Okay.
Not quite at first. The scene where Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh break out of jail is actually pretty neat. The way Alicization is programmed, any object in the world can be wielded as a weapon by someone with sufficient object control authority. In accordance with this, every object also has its own health bar and level of durability. So since the chains binding Yu-Gi-Oh and Kirito to the wall have the exact same stats, they can use them to attack each other.
Which was cool. That was quite cool that they did that, yeah.
This physics exploit, essentially, is a clever little story beat that takes advantage of and adds to SAO's unique setting by reminding us that the world Kirito's trapped in was ultimately made by flawed human beings. And the backstory of the arc's villain Administrator was conceived in a similar vein, as we learn after our heroes are ambushed by an Integrity Knight during their jailbreak and escape through a magic door into a mysterious library. There they meet Cardinal, a living embodiment of the Cardinal system that drives the Underworld simulation, who proceeds to fill them in with a tedious episode-long exposition dump that makes the one from Darling in the Franxx seem exciting and interesting by comparison.
Hey, stop pooping on Darling in the Franxx.
We learn that the leader of the Axiom Church, Pontifex Administrator, was once a regular AI girl named Quinella, who gained a cult following among the people of the Underworld thanks to her ability to heal the sick and perform miracles using sacred arts.
How people
Beneath her
change.
holy woman facade, though, Quinella was a monster of the kills animals for fun variety and sought only to amass power for herself. To achieve that end, she invented false gods for her followers to worship and established the Taboo Index to control them. Sacred arts, by the way, are Alicization's version of magic, which anyone in the Underworld can perform by chanting the right magic words. So far, so conventional, but those spells are actually system commands that spawn objects and elements in the world based on what the person chanting says. The implication being that Alicization's programmers wanted to implement magic in their simulation, but since it wasn't part of the Cardinal system they were working with, they just decided to enable console cheats instead. I gotta admit, that's a neat idea, and I like where they take it.
They do have some good
Quinella spent
ideas
her whole
in this.
life trying to reverse engineer the system commands, and in her old age finally cracks it, essentially teaching herself how to script. Using her new abilities, she reverses and halts her own aging, regaining, quote, the dazzling beauty of her late teens, which is, considering that this was written by a then 30-year-old man, a little bit creepy, but hey, this is anime, let's just be glad
Whatever.
to specify
Japan.
teens. After accomplishing that, Quinella concocted a new script to steal the authority of the Cardinal system, but ended up fusing it with her own Fluctlight in the process, transforming herself into an all-powerful being known as Administrator. The Cardinal system's primary function of maintaining order became her function as well, and she became obsessed with exercising absolute control of the populace in order to maintain the world that she had built. And oh no, there's still 15 minutes of exposition left to talk about. I'll speed things up.
Okay.
Here. After some time passed, Administrator's soul started running out of memory space, so she kidnapped a little girl to use as an external hard drive. Unfortunately, instead of doing that, she ended up fusing the little girl with the Cardinal system as well, giving her authority and power equal to her own. That's just how it goes with some of these self-taught programmers, you know? Any code they don't copy from Google is a total crapshoot. After a brief fight, the girl, now named Cardinal, hides away in the Central Cathedral Library, plotting for centuries to overthrow her.
One day I shall return.
Meanwhile, Administrator creates the Integrity Knights to stop her from doing that, basically, and also to defend the human kingdom from the monsters in the Dark Territory. But 30 Integrity Knights isn't anywhere near enough to do that, and Administrator refuses to raise a larger army out of fear that they'll overthrow her,
Yeah,
so
like, what if
unless
they
she
fight
can
back?
be defeated, humanity's basically doomed. And even if she can be, it probably still is, because once she regains control, Cardinal has said she wants to delete everything instead of letting the fated invasion from the Dark Territory actually happen. Anyway, that's where our heroes
Yeah, that was a bit of a weird one, because she
Cardinal
said, like,
has
everything would be
secretly been
gone, but you
guiding
get to
their
choose
journey
people
from
that
the
stay,
very
but
beginning,
then...
using
But,
Charlotte, a
yeah.
magic-talking
The
spider
spider!
that lives in Kirito's hair. Now that they're here, she wants the boys to climb the cathedral, take out the Integrity Knights, and bring an end to Quinella's tyranny. Basically, this is a setup for the next 11 episodes to follow our heroes on a good old-fashioned dungeon crawl / boss rush, with the
We gotta
bulk
get
of the
to the
story
top.
being taken up by fights. And to keep those fights from being tedious, the show introduces a new gimmick here: perfect sword control arts. These skills are carbon copies of Bleach's Bankai's, basically.
Yeah, pretty
Awakened
much.
forms of the legendary weapons
Yeah.
wielded by Kirito, Yu-Gi-Oh! Integrity Knights that allow them to unleash some very specific superpowers
Yes.
in combat. With these and some other tweaks, Alicization is able to place clear, easy to understand, and interesting limitations on each combatant, introducing something brand new to SAO's action formula: basic, comprehensible strategy. Say what you will about the rest of the show, I certainly have, but SAO's fight scenes have always at least delivered impressive
They've been,
animation.
they were
In
entertaining.
other respects, though, they tend to be pretty brain dead. Each one sees Kirito facing either another big monster,
And then he
a
eventually just
swordsman,
slices
or
it
a
to
bunch
death.
of mooks in a big empty room or field. That means he, along with the writers, basically never has to think about what's around him, how he can use it to his advantage, or how his
And
enemies
just slice,
might
slice,
use
slice,
it
slice.
against him. And with a lot of those enemies being mindless monsters or faceless goons, and Kirito being a flat, stalwart paragon of badassery, there's not a lot of room on either side to play believable mind games. One or more of Kirito's friends can be put in peril to back him into a corner, and sometimes the writers remember that he's supposed to have PTSD, but that's about
Only
the
sometimes.
extent of the mental games in these fights. These are basic building blocks of good fight scenes that mostly just don't exist in the first 2 seasons of this show. And without them, almost every fight boils down to whoever can hit things with their swords faster and
Harder.
harder than the other guy. Spoiler alert. It's always Kirito.
Kirito.
The series' phenomenal OST from composing goddess Yuki Kajiura does a lot to mitigate this, working in concert with the talented animation staff and Yoshikazu Iwanami's punchy sound design to give the swordplay a satisfying rhythm, but after you watch a few fights back to back, it all starts blending together into a forgettable, homogeneous slurry. Alicization actually seems to be making a sincere effort to fix these problems, even if the results are mixed. For starters, some thought has clearly gone toward making fight choreography and fight arenas more
Gotta admit, I
interesting.
did enjoy
Fights
some of
now
the
take
fights in
place
this
more
last bit.
varied settings,
Some of them were
like on a
boss.
staircase,
Especially
in a
Yuji's fight
garden,
with the
or in
ice
a cave
dude.
around a big dead dragon,
Or his-
and combatants have to
the
take advantage
hero
of
from
those
their town.
surroundings to augment their attacks, set up traps, and gain the upper hand. Which does make battles feel more interesting and exciting than they ever have, until you realize that almost all of those environments were built around the fights that would happen there rather than the other way around. In basically every room where Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh have to fight someone, there are 2 or 3 objects, structures, or substances in the immediate vicinity that, without fail, are utilized in the fight. For instance, one encounter takes place in a room surrounded by pillars with a big stained glass skylight in the roof, which is the inner chamber of the 50th floor of a 100-floor tower, but just don't worry about the
I never thought
In
that.
this room, Kirito fights a
Oh,
lady
that's so
whose
funny.
sword can
That
reflect
doesn't make any
sunlight
sense.
into laser beams, which he evades, of course, by taking cover behind the pillars. This approach makes battles that should be dynamic and engaging feel rote and predictable, and turns
It's very
every
video
arcade
gamey,
room
though.
of
Like,
the
you go
central
into a dungeon and
cathedral
then
into a
you take
glorified
advantage of,
version
like,
those
what's
empty
around you.
canyons where all the fights happen in Dragon Ball Z. Each bit of decor becomes one of those clearly different rocks that you know is going to blow up sooner or later. So when I tell you that Yu-Gi-Oh with his magic ice sword fights a samurai dude in a
Water.
room full of water, that's really all I have to say for you to form a more or less complete picture of that fight in your mind. And even
Yeah, but I
when
think
the
he did where he,
combat or
like,
narrative
created the ice
purpose of the
blade, threw his
feature
sword
is
up
less
and was
immediately
kinda cool. I
obvious,
like
you're
that.
going to end up eyeing it, second-guessing how, not if, it will be used. In addition to robbing the fights of their tension, this makes every area in the show look fake and video gamey. And this is SAO, so that would be fine
I mean,
if this were set in a video game like Aincrad or Alfheim rather
It
than
is
a
technically set in a
complex
video game,
simulated
though.
world. These are supposed to be places where thinking creatures sleep and eat and go about their days, but they all feel like, well, gimmicky boss arenas in a dungeon crawler. So SAO has finally cracked the code and managed to create a believable impression that you're watching someone else play a halfway decent video game in the one season where it shouldn't do that.
Huh.
Oh,
Okay.
well, they tried. To be fair, I would probably
my leg's
play
gone
that
numb.
video game based on its premise.
Ah.
Each of the Integrity Knights is a former hero or champion whose memories have
Cool.
been locked away, and each one wields a legendary weapon with deep ties to the lore of the Underworld. A time-slicing blade forged from the arm of the system clock,
The clock,
a
yeah.
bow and whip made from the corpses of ancient and powerful monsters, a silver blade forged from the concentrated light of the sun. Those are some admittedly cool swords, and their ties to the history
Pretty
of the
wicked.
world, in theory,
Wicked
give
cool.
them and their wielders a certain amount of significance that the generic goons and monsters seen in previous seasons of SAO lacked. In concept, it's not unlike how the bosses in Souls games are written.
Huh.
If I'd read that pitch on the back of a box at GameStop, back when they actually sold video games, I'd almost certainly have picked it up. But, to be also balanced, I would have almost certainly given that game a scathing review based on its execution of the concept. Because, and this probably shouldn't have surprised me, all of the knights turn out to be incredibly generic, boring characters whose fights with our heroes have zero deeper meaning. You've got your bright-eyed newbie who's a bit too sure of himself, an old guy with a strong sense of honor who's loyal to the church, another old guy with a strong sense of honor who's loyal to the church but starting to have his doubts, and two kids who think it's fun to murder people. Those two are about the most unique villains of the bunch, even if you can see through their villainous machinations a mile away.
Yeah, they were weird.
And all they do in the story is let Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh fast travel. What a waste. I was willing
But then
to
there was the
accept some
girl
crappy
who
writing,
was like,
given
oh,
that
you're not going
the
to fight me
series
because
was
of a girl. And
trying to
Kirito's like,
build a roster of
I don't actually care that you're a girl. I'm going to beat you anyway.
could be interesting.
Equality.
JoJo
Gender
pulled
equality.
that off multiple times, but it's safest to keep expectations low with SAO. However, even doing that, it managed to disappoint me. Only 8 of those knights are ever defined as characters, with only 2 more, according to the series wiki, appearing later in the light novel. So there's really no excuse for them to have this little personality and this little thought put into them. The worst offender, in my estimation, is Fanatio. Fanatio is your standard tough girl with a gendered inferiority complex. Her thing is that she hides her face because she thinks that
She
men
never
won't
gets a serious
take her
fight.
seriously
Yeah.
in battle if they know she's a girl.
There we go.
You've seen some variation of this a dozen times already, but the real problem here isn't that her personality is cliched. The problem is that, in the context of the show, it doesn't make any goddamn sense. Fully half of all the students who we meet at the Sword Mastery Academy are women, and not once does anyone suggest that they don't belong there due to their gender. Not even the literal rapist bullies. Additionally, half of the Integrity Knights in the series are women, more if we count the ones who were introduced later in the light novels and Fanatio's own disciples, the 4 Oscillation Blades. And, oh yeah, the ruler of this entire society is a woman, too.
Yeah.
It genuinely does not seem like this is a world where gender-based prejudice exists or would have a reason to
but she could
exist.
personally
Yet
feel that way.
Fanatio, and only Fanatio, has apparently encountered such severe and pervasive discrimination that she's developed a complex that defines her entire personality. And also, she's encountered all of that discrimination since having her memory wiped and becoming an Integrity Knight, literally the most revered group of people in the
I suppose that's true as well,
entire
yeah, it is a bit
country.
off.
It could be that her superior Berkuli treats her differently, but when we meet him later, he talks about Alice and never once says anything to
bad,
indicate
as
that he
if
thinks
like,
less
oh,
of
she's
her
a
or
woman,
Fanatio,
God.
for that matter, as a warrior because she's a woman, and even if he does treat her differently, that wouldn't be a very good reason for her to extrapolate that to every single man on the planet. Now, maybe the Dark Knights from the Dark Territory, who she's fought before, have a bit of a sexist streak. That would make sense, because they're literal monsters programmed to be evil, but then why would an Integrity Knight care what people from the Dark Territory think of her?
Yeah.
And why would she assume that humans think the same way? It just doesn't make sense for this kind of character.
I suppose it doesn't. I did like it though. I messaged Nux about it. I said, gender equality moment.
And persistent problems with how SAO
I don't care.
Firstly, the series
I'm still going to beat you anyway.
thought into its world building beyond the immediate implications of whatever exposition we've just heard. And secondly, the show's characters are all conceived not as human beings with their own history that informs their disposition, but rather as narrative automatons born in a vacuum whose personalities are defined mainly by the purpose they're meant to serve in the story. Fanatio only has a hang-up about how men view her because it allows a facade of additional meaning to be stapled on to what would otherwise be a purely functional filler fight with generic, insignificant bad guys. It also gives Kirito another opportunity to prove what a nice guy he is by saying, "Actually, milady, I don't see gender.
I'll still
Mayhaps
beat you, yeah."
the real sexist one." is you! This eye-rolling exchange goes to show the perils of failing to flesh out your significant supporting characters. At best, they end up being wholly forgettable. I literally couldn't remember anything about Eldry without reading the wiki, leaving the world.
All the characters are quite forgettable.
And
I like
worst,
Yu-Gi-Oh!
They
though.
can end up
Yu-Gi-Oh!
breaking
Yu-Gi-Oh!
that world
Yu-Gi-Oh!
for the sake
Yu-Gi-Oh!
of what feels like an incredibly ham-fisted political message. Ah well, at least the fight looked pretty. Unfortunately, this issue with the knights being boring also carries through to Alice. Out of all of them, she is the most well-developed, and she'd better be, considering how important she is, but she's not nearly well-developed enough to work in the protagonist role that she's meant to fill later in the series. She's stoic, righteous, and quick to anger when she sees injustice. Your standard knightly character, basically. And that's true both when she's fighting our heroes, and after she and Kirito are blown out of the tower and forced to work together to survive. The scene where Kirito tells her the truth about her past, and she's confronted with the possibility that the church might not be the institution of justice that she thought it was, does show hints of depth beneath her stoic outer shell.
There's something else going on down there. There's emotions and feelings and stuff. There's a character somewhere.
Series, but we've yet to get to those
Oh,
parts,
that guy is so weird.
Doesn't do much here except for get angry about bad people being bad and swing a sword around. Now, you might be tempted to label Alice as just another generic Saber knockoff, but that's not really fair. After all, Reki Kawahara started writing Alicization in 2006, when Fate was just taking off and the anime was just airing. So Alice isn't just any boring Saber knockoff, she's one of the first boring Saber knockoffs. Another example of this franchise's brave, pioneering spirit. So, yeah, in spite of throwing away the original cast and starting fresh, SAO Alicization, I'm sad to say, does very little to fix the series' empty character writing. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is possibly the best character in the series so far, but he's only one character, and he's only really good by SAO standards. He'd be a side character, at best, in a better written series like SAO Alternative. This weak
Alternative was good,
makes
I like
the whole
that.
show feel a bit empty.
The end bit was a bit like, oh, now you're being the same.
Cool,
But, yeah.
Its world, for all its unique history and interesting systems, is ultimately a set full of mannequins, and if not for Yu-Gi-Oh! And maybe Cardinal, its story would be entirely devoid of personal stakes.
Yeah.
One place where they did succeed in improving the show is compositing, or photography as it's called in the anime industry. In the cell animation days, the photography department was responsible for layering animation cells on top of the background art and taking the actual photos that make up the final film reel. In digital animation, they do much the same thing, only digitally, taking the work of every other department, CGI, background art,
Everything does look nice.
character animation, and putting it all together, tweaking colors, lighting, lines, and other factors to make everything look uniform. Well, that's the goal anyway. SAO has always had gorgeous, detailed background art and appealing, colorful character designs, but in its first 2 seasons, they rarely looked like they really belonged together. It generally looked like they were lit by completely different sources, and when the show tried to incorporate 3D backgrounds and camera movement into fight scenes, the 3D and 2D animation would often be out of sync, creating the impression that Kirito and co were brawling on a big CGI slip and slide. I haven't brought this criticism up in previous videos because it's honestly a pretty common modern anime, especially A1 Pictures shows released around the same time as SAO. And even amid all my nitpicks of the series, I knew it would feel super nitpicky. But now that they've actually fixed it, it makes a world of difference. For Ordinal Scale, A1 Pictures brought in a new director of photography, Kentaro Iwaki, who used his experience from working on the Gundam OVAs and God Eater to drastically improve the movie's overall look and feel. And once that was done, he stuck around to work on Alicization as well. Waki tweaked a lot of small things about the show's look and feel, but most noticeably, the lighting is now a heck of a lot more consistent between characters and environments, and the background art, CGI, and traditionally animated elements are all colored in with a subtle, uniform gradient that makes everything feel more like it exists in the same world,
It looks
or at
so
least like it was
good.
painted with
I
the
like
same
it.
brush. There are still occasional problems with elements being out of sync with each other, but they're less egregious, and these changes make them
Nothing
much
really
less
stands out.
noticeable when they do crop up. It's a small but tangible improvement to the overall viewing experience, and for the purposes of this video, it serves as a nice little compliment to sandwich all the not nice things that I just had to say about it. And I would love to be able to leave this review at that, saying that SAO Alicization, while it's not really good, at least minimizes many of the series' worst aspects,
It's not awful.
with egregious exceptions, and in its best moments makes for a fun, mindless, generic fantasy.
Don't take it seriously.
But
Same
this
with
is
every
Sword
Sword Art Online
we're
series.
talking about here, and if there's one thing this series is known for, it's capping off each major arc with a train wreck of an ending that burns through almost every
The last few episodes were difficult to watch. I'll be honest.
Flaming, horny clown humping an armless woman to death.
Yes.
Golly, Jeff, that's a weird image to pull out.
I was
of
just
nowhere.
on the phone to my
Boy,
girlfriend
is
before
it.
filming this,
There's a
explaining
lot
how it
that happens
ended.
in this
She was like, what?
4 episodes and comprises the entire volume of the light novel, so I'll just give you my commentary along with the Cliff's Notes.
Here we go.
After fighting Berkuli and being knocked out by a clown, Yu-Gi-Oh wakes up in the chambers of the administrator herself and screws up his one chance to kill her in her sleep. After that, she wakes up and says, hey, how about you betray your friends?
Let's bang.
At first, Yu-Gi-Oh gives her a hard no, but then she offers up the goods, and that turns into a very hard maybe. Meanwhile, Kirito and Alice, who is now free of her brainwashing, make their way to the inner sanctum of Prime Senator Chudelkin, who is the ultimate literal incarnation of SAO's most overused villain trope, a sadistic, horny clown.
Yes,
a role
he is.
that legendary
So annoying.
voice actor Takagi Wataru has way too much fun with. His performance is probably the best part of this entire final battle. After a brief scuffle, Chudelkin escapes to the next floor, where Kirito finds himself faced by the newest Integrity Knight, Yu-Gi-Oh! Synthesis 32. Pause for shocked gasps. Yes, after 2 seasons, SAO has finally pulled the trigger on Chekhov's gun, and Kirito is fighting an ally who is basically his equal in combat. They fight for a couple minutes, mostly just so the show can say that it did, and then Yu-Gi-Oh's hasty brainwashing is immediately reversed, rendering the whole sequence of events kinda pointless. Yu-Gi-Oh freezes his friends and pretends to still be brainwashed long enough to get close to Administrator, whom he tries to stab with a magic dagger that was given to him by Cardinal. Unfortunately, in doing so, he activates Administrator's trap card. Nuh-uh, I'm immune to metal weapons.
Yes, metal weapons do not work.
Literally serves no other purpose than to render the knight
Wouldn't
useless.
Cardinal know that, though?
Sword
It's just like,
is made of
whatever.
really hard wood, and Yu-Gi-Oh's is made of ice. But hey, when you got one fight taking up an entire novel, you pad it out however you can. Speaking of, when Kirito and Alice join their friends seconds later, Chudelkin, fueled by... This part's not even remotely a joke, by the way.
Horniness.
Fueled by his thirst for the Administrator, transforms into a giant, flaming, horny clown, which is set up as this big climactic event at
And
the
it
end
doesn't
of
even
episode
last
21,
a few
but
minutes.
5 minutes into episode 22, after 2 attacks...
Kirito just goes, nah.
Following that, and then, 10 more minutes of useless exposition-laden back-and-forth dialogue, Administrator calls forth her true secret weapon, a puppet knight made of 30 divine object-class weapons, each as strong as Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh's swords, that immediately eviscerate...
They just go, nah, nah, nah.
It would probably be really intimidating if it didn't look like a bionicle.
It does look like a bionicle, my god.
Charlotte jumps out of
The
Kirito's hair
spider!
and reveals that she's actually a Dynamax Pokemon, growing to massive size to fend off the metal monstrosity.
And does nothing.
She doesn't last long, but it gives Yu-Gi-Oh enough time to stab the room's elevator platform with his magic dagger. This allows Cardinal to open a door to Quinella's inner chamber, and in short order she blasts away the sword golem and heals both of our wounded heroes. After he's healed, Kirito is confused as to why Charlotte would sacrifice herself to save him, but Cardinal explains that even without a Flectlight, an AI that spends enough time with a person can learn to love them. Which you'd think he'd know, since, his adopted daughter responds to hey Siri, but...
Never mind.
If I keep diving down every level I find, we'll be here for another hour, and that's not the most meaningful criticism I can level of this scene. With the whole gang finally gathered together and the final villain floating before them in a shot that should be taught in every film study class, we're at last ready to watch our heroes spend another 10 minutes standing in place, bantering
Let's
back
all
and
talk.
forth with the villain
Talk.
instead of actually fighting. Can you guys just not do 2 things at once? Okay.
Never mind.
During this interminable exchange, Cardinal says, "You can't beat us, it's 4-on-1. To which Administrator replies, 4-on-1? Actually, it's 300-on-4. For you see, these swords are made of
people.
Through more exposition, we learn that Quinella made the sword golem by converting 300 of the Integrity Knight's closest friends and family into living weapons, and that she controls the golem with the crystallized memories of the knights, which are embedded in the mural above them. Like I said, literally every notable feature of every room turns out to be a problem in combat. Anyway, shocked by this shocking revelation, Cardinal forgets that she was planning to delete the whole world and everyone in it.
Yeah, it just goes out the window that now.
That she can't morally destroy a golem made of 300 people. She then immediately bows down to let Administrator murder her without a fight.
And she just tortures her.
Which is exactly what I wanted to see after the show spent half its runtime establishing her incredible fighting potential and building up toward this final confrontation.
And then no fight.
The two of them.
No fight.
You know, can't have anyone other than Kirito successfully duel the final boss. That might make the people who are projecting themselves onto him feel slightly inadequate. So, for no reason, Cardinal just anticlimactically eats shit and dies. But then Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a brainwave. Wait a second, if those swords are made of people,
what if I become a sword?
I can be made of swords! Yeah, that's really where this is
it goes.
Using the last of
turns into
power,
a sword,
to assert dominance,
and not being wielded, flies around.
From Kirby Air Ride. With this new power, he manages to fend off the golem and cut off Administrator's arm. But in the process, his blade is broken in half, which causes him to transform back into a now slightly more bisected human. With Quinella disarmed and Yu-Gi-Oh's full ice sword having just become available, Kirito takes the opportunity to do the dual-wielding thing that he always does for like a minute, after which they both cut off each other's arms.
And also then, turning into the original SAO costume that he had.
Uses her hair to pick up and strangle.
Yeah, this was annoying. We didn't establish she could do this already.
Guys turning into swords. Why not? And with the last of his strength, he plunges his sword into her chest because she's only holding him with hair. That's still not quite enough to finish her, though.
Nope.
Out of options, Administrator runs to the Underworld command console to upload her consciousness to the real world, cackling as she declares that she'll see Kirito on the other side. But fate has other plans for her. Horny clown-shaped plans. Chudelkin, apparently still alive somehow, chooses this moment to light himself on fire, jump into the tractor beam that's
and rub his face on her boobs,
and hump her as they both burn to death for no discernible reason
at all.
Thus, the final battle is concluded with a completely baffling instance of what I would call Deus Ex Machina if this scene were not definitive evidence that God does not exist.
It was
At
so
least the explosion animation
strange.
With the enemy defeated in the anticlimax to end all anticlimaxes, Kirito rushes over to heal
and then we
his
have a
dying
sad
friend,
moment.
who refuses his aid, saying, quote, "It's better this way. If I lived, we'd have to fight over our own Alice." In other words, Yu-Gi-Oh! Still wants to restore Alice Zuberg's memories of her childhood, but he kinda just assumes that Kirito would want to give the current Alice Synthesis 30 a chance to live her own life. Even though Kirito's been on board for the plan to rescue her and restore her memories from moment one and never actually expressed any intent to stop her from regaining her memories, so it's not clear that any actual conflict would have arisen there. But more importantly, their opinions don't matter, because Alice has stated pretty damn definitively that she wants to recover her lost memories, even if it means erasing her current personality. So it would be incredibly selfish of the two boys to fight each other for, effectively, control of her body. Or for Yu-Gi-Oh! To, say, take her memories with him when he dies. Like an asshole. To be fair to Yu-Gi-Oh! Though, he never got a chance to find out what she wanted, because while the series had time for a 4-episode-long, exposition-padded fight scene and a dry history lesson over tea in a library, it apparently didn't have enough for its two most important supporting characters to have a single, meaningful conversation with each other. Even though the one's motivation to save the other is the main driving force of this entire 24-episode storyline.
It's the plot.
Yu-Gi-Oh! Has less of a chance to emotionally connect with Alice Synthesis 30 and learn about the person she's become than he does to connect with the villainess who brainwashed her. And from what I have heard, the light novels never actually acknowledge this, so that's not a twist of intentional, ironic tragedy. Reki Kawahara literally just forgot to do it.
No.
One of the things that I've learned to
Oh.
accept over my years working as a critic is that sometimes it's okay for a story to forego logic in favor of delivering a more emotionally resonant moment or speaking to a deeper theme. That's why I'm not pushing my glasses up my nose and nitpicking that Cardinal showed Kirito how to access the entire Sacred Arts command list. It's already been established that he's a good enough programmer to save a dying AI in this exact engine, and also Quinella left her console wide open just next to him. Logically, there's a hell of a lot more that he could be doing to save Yu-Gi-Oh, and maybe it would be more impactful if, say, he tried and failed, missing his friend's last words in the process and learning a lesson about not trying to do too much. But on the whole, it's still a good thing that SAO is trying to have any kind of meaningful character death at all, so I'm willing to let that slide. Even if it is transparently obvious that half the reason Yu-Gi-Oh's getting the axe is so that Kirito can add Alice to his technically not a harem without conflict. Why am I defending this again? Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that while obviously it's better to have both, it's okay for a story not to make perfect sense so long as it's emotionally satisfying. But that defense doesn't work when the story forgets to take the most obvious step to give proper closure to what is arguably the single most important relationship in the entire fucking season. That is, no matter how you slice it, terrible, sloppy writing. SAO Alicization has made steps to fix many of the series' problems.
Please talk about how the
even
actual episode ends as well, please.
Significant remains completely.
Because I was just like, what?
This anime has a knack for setting up cool scenarios and creating potent emotional hooks,
And then does
but
nothing
it
with it.
consistently fails to follow through on them in any way. Kirito's allied with a morally questionable demigod who's using him and Yu-Gi-Oh as a pawn in her war with her evil sister, and instead of doing anything, she commits Sudoku for no reason. We've got a secondary protagonist who's learning the ways of the blade from Kirito with his own motivations and love interest, and he dies without doing the one thing he's wanted to do his entire life, and without the story acknowledging the tragedy of that. And after sacrificing both of these story threads so that Kirito can have a one-on-one duel with the big bad, she chokes him out with her hair, and the thing that actually does her in is being humped to death by a clown. Which is why, despite the admittedly intriguing sequel hook that sees Kirito calling into the real world only to find that the research facility is under siege by armed gunmen, my expectations for the rest of the story have hit rock bottom. I really tried to like this show and give it the benefit of the doubt wherever I could. I hope I've made that clear by acknowledging its good points in this video. I was hoping that a clean break from the tired characters and setting of past seasons might be what the series needed to revitalize itself. But Alicization, like every other season of this show, is still plagued by flat, ill-conceived, disposable characters, thoughtless, inconsistent world-building, god-awful pacing, and a chronic inability to make anything feel like it actually matters. In its worst moments, this season is every bit as despicable as anything we've seen before in SAO. At its best, it's mindlessly consumable popcorn fare. Tasty, empty calories. Mostly, though, I just found it to be boring, occasionally baffling, and forgettable. And in those all-too-common moments, it was only the show's lavish production values that kept it feeling remotely watchable. I can acknowledge that SAO Alicization has gotten better, and that it seems to be slowly grasping what it actually wants to be.
It's going to be interesting to see how the rest of the show goes.
Just a slightly less rancid one. That said, I can also acknowledge that this is based on content that was written over a decade ago, and that a significant number of its flaws may be exacerbated by, or even born from, choices in its adaptation. I've spent a lot of time criticizing SAO as an anime, but I've never engaged with it as a book. And I'd like to change that with the help of today's sponsor, Bookwalker, as well as all of you guys. Reki Kawahara has expressed that he wants to improve his writing, and though I take them with a grain of salt, fan accounts of his most recent books suggest that he's managed to pull it off to an extent. Specifically, in his SAO Progressive series, he's reworked the part that most people actually like, the Einkrad arc,
I've got
into
the
a more
manga.
detailed
I got the
story
first
that goes through Sword
5
Art
volumes
floor
of
by
Progressive.
floor without time skips.
It's interesting.
So, over the next month, I'm going to be reading the first volume of SAO Progressive, and toward the end of July, I'll be posting a video discussing doing it. But
I don't know
won't
whether to
just
check
be
that video
sharing
out or
my
not.
thoughts. I want to hear yours.
It's another
this
long
video will
one.
be the first installment of what I'm tentatively calling the Basement Book Club.
Yeah.
And a big part of it will be reading and responding to your emails about the novel. If you'd like to participate in that, please read
I've
SAO
read the first
Progressive
5
alongside
volumes
me
of the manga,
and send
so I
your
might
thoughts
check it out,
about it
because
to
then that pretty much should cover like some of that.
before, let's say, July 15th. And if you're wondering where you can pick the book up, well, that's where Bookwalker comes in. If you don't already know, Bookwalker is Kadokawa's official ebook store, where you can buy hundreds of English-language manga and light novels to read on your phone, tablet, or PC. That, of course, includes SAO, as well as every other book that Reki Kawahara's ever written, along with all of their manga adaptations, so make sure that you're actually buying the light novels before you check out. If you use the promo code BASEMENT when you do, you'll get a 600 yen discount, bringing the price of the first volume of SAO Progressive down to just $2.
Damn, that's
and
decent.
Hey, if you're already reading SAO Progressive, you'll be happy to know that Volume 6 comes out Sunday, July 9th, and that promo code will work just as well on that. That code can also be used to buy anything else on their store, by the way, so if you're not interested in reading SAO, you have hundreds of other
title I saw on the right
there? Bookwalker's pretty much my favorite way to read manga and light novels these days, so if you're looking to do some summer reading or just kill time while flying between cons, check them out at the link in the
because
description.
I just casually fly between
Let me know in
conventions.
the comments below what you thought of this review and of SAO Alicization.
I did like the review, it was very good.
Next part of the series, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos about anime and sometimes other things delivered straight from my mother's basement every week. I'm Jeff Thu, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.
Fair enough, that was a good video. That did not feel like a 54-minute video either. I was very invested in that video. Some very, very valid points made. Interesting points. Like, I was in my head like, oh, I liked how, in a comedic way, like, I was just like, oh, I like how Kirito, told that girl they didn't care that he's a girl and just gonna kick his ass anyway, but then it's like, that whole gender inequality thing was never brought up ever in the whole show, so it very was much, like, out of nowhere. So I was like, valid. The fight scenes I thought were cool, and the animation was quality, I did like it, but yeah, some things just really were put out of nowhere, and then the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh! Never got an emotional moment with Alice, which was like part of the whole reasoning behind why they were on their quest, was ridiculous. And the final fight with the boss, I was just like, wow. He described it exactly like I described it to my girlfriend on the phone. She gets beaten by a fat dude who turns himself on fire and rips his face into boobs. But what I'm going to do is, because you guys waited ages for me to do a reaction to this after it came out, I'm going to watch Sword Art Online weekly as it comes out with the new season, so that when videos like this pop up, I can react to them closer to the time, and you guys aren't, like, waiting for it. I apologise for how long it's taken me to watch this. Videos this long, I need, like, I have a few hours to focus on this so that I can put it in the software, export it. It takes ages to, like, tweak the audio in places and stuff and whatnot, so I apologise for that. I'll work harder in the future. Thank you guys very much for watching. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments down below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos, and I'll see you guys. Yes, all you guys, next time.